first things first, couple of date changes on the assignments itself. The exercise we just went over 2 days ago isn't actually due until Tuesday, right? So instead of on Monday, it didn't make any sense. It made a lot more sense to just give you a whole week for it. And I definitely want to give you guys enough time to work through it and calculate the shade and shadow, just because it's definitely worth your time. And you'll notice that it's significantly easier, right? Now today's assignment, if we can take a look at it, is obviously the continuation of the observation tower, but now in a digital realm, right? So actually one of the first things that we need to do, Allegra, one of the first things that we actually need to do is go over some of the methods that, well, we can either trace exactly what we did in analog, or quite simply just kind of pin it up next to ourselves and copy it, right? Obviously just kind of draw it quote unquote by hand in the computer, right? As you guys learn, you're probably getting quicker and better at with exercise 5, right? Definitely picking up on some of those things. I definitely saw some great things yesterday as well. However, to continue the conversation, you'll notice we jumped back and forth quite a bit, and I mentioned yesterday that essentially in the digital realm, we either have our people or our students that this is kind of their first time with the computer. So very often they're a little hesitant on modeling something, right? However, just like exercise 5, you can essentially draw stuff in 2D, right? So really this next part of the assignment is you need your floor plans, your sections, a 2-point perspective, and a 1-point perspective, right? Now, if this is your first time and you're still hesitant on modeling, right? You don't know how long it's going to take and you're still kind of really fumbling around with the program, then please continue in the 2-dimensional method. That means you'll still set up your box or a piece of paper. It means you'll draw all your lines just like you would in Studio, right? Except now it's a completely different drafting table, and instead not a drafting table, but a nice personal computer that unfortunately dies sometimes, right? Your desk will never die on you though. It may run out of lead, but that's about it. However, we need all 4 of those things. So I definitely want to dive into some of the methods. I don't plan for this to take too long, just because I like my videos to be at least an hour to an hour 15 minutes. As soon as it hits 2 hours, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a long tutorial. So I like to make it quick and more digestible bites. However, I want to go over both methods today, at least on, say, a 2-point perspective, and how to start modeling if you're part of the A team. So I mentioned, okay, well, if it's your first time and you're still fumbling with the program, then obviously continue just drawing in 2 dimensions. If you're taking computer graphics, however, or if you're taking computer graphics or actually already have some modeling experience, say you've already modeled in SketchUp before, or maybe Revit or other programs, then by all means consider yourself the A team and start modeling your observation tower, right? And so obviously some of the stuff I go over today might just be kind of a little quick review, or wow, Professor Barrett does this a lot differently than say Professor so-and-so or wherever you learned it, right? Because even high schools now teach SketchUp and things like that too. However, please don't work in SketchUp or continue in SketchUp. We want to learn Rhino, right, and get more familiar with this program. So don't use it as a crutch, but instead try modeling out in Rhino. And of course, today's tutorial should help significantly in that. The first thing that we need to go over, however, you'll see that there's really only about 4 weeks left, and as I mentioned, that 10th week, I'm not even going to be here Wednesday or Thursday, right? So more than likely, I'm going to have our final due very similar to what you see outside. It'll be a print on 24 by 36. It'll probably be actually horizontal, or landscape, not portrait. However, we'll get there. That'll be part 4 and the last part for our observation tower. The reason I wanted to say all this also is so that we can get it recorded for anyone who's not here, or maybe needs to hear it over and over again. Right. Anyway, let's just get right to it. There's a couple of options here. Like I mentioned, you could use your exact drawing. Now, honestly, I don't recommend it. right? Because actually, as soon as you scan one of your analog drawings and you zoom in into it and you actually take a look at it, it's really off, right? Even though it looked really good on the paper, and you know, as soon as you digitalize things, you have to line things up perfectly, otherwise you get pixelization. There's actually no such thing as a curve in a digital realm, right? In fact, it's a Cartesian plane on all of our screens. It's X's and Y's, and it's all pixelated. Every time that you see a circle, it's more the illusion of a circle rather than an actual circle. So just something to kind of at least be aware of. Don't get me wrong, we have the scanner right over here, and it's definitely an option. How many of you guys have scanned before? Hopefully so. In D1, it's not really a hard process. I didn't want to actually make a tutorial or a video of it today just because it is relatively simple, and I can help any of those after this tutorial if you do need help scanning. However, what I would honestly recommend, guys, is just drawing it yourself. Really would, especially if it's your first time working with these programs. So really the same thing as last time. If I did scan that picture, I would type in picture. I would hit enter, of course find the picture that I want to use, and then of course press next. So in my case, I'll probably have a picture here somewhere. Pics. That one's pretty good. So let's say I was going to trace that. I'd simply put it in there. And it would actually come in as the layer that I give it, right? So I could even hide it or lock it or treat it just like any dimensional object. What's also really nice, I don't think I mentioned this last time, but if you double click on your viewport, that's how you actually expand the screens and actually see all your viewports. And to be honest, there's even more options in that viewport. We can change it to a top view, a side view, whatever view that you actually need at the time. But I just wanted to explain that. But as you can see, it exists in a three-dimensional realm, so that little picture is right there. One thing I did want to also mention is your zoom select. It's this little button right here that looks like a magnifying glass with like mitosis going on. If you click on that, it's going to directly focus in right on that object and look pretty nice. Looks like I have a couple things running, so let's turn those off. Then I'm screen recording, so it might be a little bit choppy. Hopefully the recording's not actually choppy, so that should be okay. Get out of here. Anyway, so we could take it that method, and obviously what I'd want to do is, well, let's imagine this is my floor plan, right? Of course I would just start tracing my lines, right? And then of course could simply do that. However, in this scenario, like I said, it's a little, I think, easier to just start drawing it, right? So I'm just going to draw one by memory, and I want to draw it to an actual scale, right? So one of the main rules of really drawing anything in a digital realm is you either make it 1-to-1, where the building is, if it actually is 25 feet by 25 feet, you type in 25 by 25 feet. The reason this is because in the digital world, we want the model to be 1-to-1 scale, right? We want it, if it actually is 1,000 miles, let's make it actually 1,000 miles, right? I wouldn't put it in, you know, a 1/4 inch scale because that would be ridiculous. What if my professor wants to see a picture of it at 1-to-1,000? Crap, I got to do all these calculations to make that bigger and true again, right? So anytime that you're modeling, make it 1-to-1. However, I just mentioned we're tracing stuff. So what do I actually need to do? I have two options here. Don't get me wrong, I can still make it 1-to-1, and you can see what happens. So I know that my building footprint is 25 by 25 feet. So in my case, if I do that rectangle, 25 feet, enter, by 25 feet, enter, you can see that it's quite large compared to that 11 by 17 paper that I made the other day, right? Don't get me wrong, I can make a calculation for, let's say, putting this floor plan, if you will, on an 11 by 17 to scale, right? Since it is 1-by-1, and I know this is a little confusing, which is why it's recorded, but this is actually the trick to all scales. When you have something at 1-to-1, so in our case 25 by 25 feet, I'll make my dimension lines real quick. Right, it gives us 25 units by 25 units because I'm already in feet. all I did was type in DIM, enter, for dimension, right? Man, it is going so slow. Let's turn up my fans. One great program to have if you have a Macintosh is Max Fan Control. It's free, and you can control really the heating situation on your laptop. The cooler your laptop is, the faster it runs. Another good tip about a computer is to always have it plugged in. The better power voltage that it has, the faster that your computer will run, and the longer your chips will run as well. I'm going to go ahead and max mine out. Hopefully it doesn't come up in the recording. And really a general rule of thumb is you don't want your chips to be above 165 degrees Fahrenheit. That's just kind of a given rule. Don't get me wrong, they can run at 200, but you're shortening the lifespan of your computer the hotter that you run it, right? And when you don't have it in a AC plug, you're ruining your battery actually to an extent as well. So be very careful. Another good tip is to always restart your computer once a week. That's it. Every Sunday. Do it like every Saturday or something. But you should really have your computer on and restart it once a week. Arguably, that can sometimes be different for each computer. Anyway, enough of the computer tips today, but hopefully we're running a little bit faster. Yeah, it's running a little bit faster. Sometimes it gets stuck like that, especially when I'm screen recording, so I do apologize. Usually if I move around a little bit, it goes away. Nope, not today. It looks like I got a lot of stuff in here, maybe from a previous file. Sorry if you have extra stuff in your file. I do use these over and over again. Anyway, hopefully this will get out of the way. Usually, there we go. So we have our 25 by 25, but it actually specifically says in the assignment that my drawings need to fit at least on 11 by 17s. So I want to calculate for that, and all I need is actually the scale. So in my case, it would be the amount of feet that I can fit per scale. So on 11 by 17, I can fit 11 inches by 17 inches, which times 4 would be 4 feet per inch, right? So really all I have to do is 44, right? So 11 times 4, which would be 44 feet. And can anybody do 17 times 4 real quick? Calculator? I know it ends with an 8. Is it 68? Well, let's find out. 68 feet. Let's see if it looks like a 11 by 17. Sure does. But now what's really nice is my model, technically 1-to-1, but now I have a piece of paper, or a bounding box is what I like to call it, that now represents 11 by 17 to scale, right? What if I want a 24 by 36? 24 times 4. 36 times 4. What if I wanted at 1/8? Times it by 8. What if I wanted at 1/16? Times it by 16. What if I wanted at 1/32? Times it by 32. That's how easy it starts to become. Now don't get me wrong, I know this is probably way over our heads today, but hopefully it starts making sense when we start printing and things like that. Don't get me wrong, you can do viewports, and if you're more familiar with this program, you can start to set up pages and things like that. I'm not going to go over that today. That's something I more do in computer graphics, where it's a little more necessary. In our case, it makes a lot more sense to be more aware of the scale factors that happen in a digital realm. Anyway, let's continue, right? Because after all, I do need to draw this in 2 dimensions, right? So let's go ahead and offset. Let's say maybe this is an exterior wall in my situation. I'm going to go with 6 inches. Perfect, right? And now I can actually use the dimensions that I normally would doing my drawings, right? Let's get another offset in there. Maybe I get my stairs. Maybe I have kind of like a spiral stair going on. And I do want to model some stairs for us as well. So let's go ahead and offset. Let's say my stairs are 3 feet or 36 inches wide. I'm going to go ahead and put them on the inside. Sweet. I'm going to go ahead and take that and explode it so I could use the lines. I don't know, maybe my stairs don't go all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and make a line and make sure that my perpendicular is on my O-snap. you know, not a big deal. I'm also one that kind of draws a bunch of lines and then I organize it with a bunch of layers. So don't get me wrong. The reason I teach that layers are so important is because I never used them, right, as a student. And I quickly learned that I need to practice what I preach, but I need to also preach the right things, if you will. But at least that's the way I like to go about it. Get stuff out, draw it out, and then organize. But make sure you do organize. In our case, I just need to offset or even just move this or copy it 12 inches. To be fair, there's like 12 different ways to do something in all of these programs, you know, so there's not exactly one right way. Now, don't get me wrong, I could sit there and do that forever, right? It also looks a little big, so maybe I want to check my dimension. Okay, it is 1. So, I mean, maybe it's just kind of a thin stair. Another thing I can do is I can work a little smarter. I can do copy. I can pick a point of which I want to copy from and simply copy that over and over again. Of course, increasing my speed a little bit, but making sure that I line, of course, to those previous points. The only trouble with this is as soon as you get one of them wrong, they all become pretty wrong. However, we can kind of check it. It lines up with that exact piece, telling me that nailed it. And as you can see, I've already got some stairs going, right? Not too big of a deal. I could even start getting, say, the rails. So let's offset those rails. Usually they're about 1 inch. So I'm gonna go about 1 inch in. And usually rails are about 2 inches thick. So I'm gonna go offset again and type in 2 inches, enter, and do that. I could trim all of these really at the same time in one fell swoop, depending on how fast your computer is or how big the screen is. Right, we could definitely get those out of the way and start to make it look like the rail is above the stairs. So yeah, I can even trim between 2 lines. But we're starting to get a floor plan for sure, right? Another thing that I can draw in is a line. You can get arrows as well, right? But I might need an up arrow. So I'm gonna hold shift and make sure that it stays perpendicular. I could draw a fancy arrow if I wanted to, sort of a polyline situation. I know that all good arrows are you know, reflective. And look at that, the smart trace is even trying to help me out. So I can take that piece, mirror it, and really get a sense of drawing it by hand, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I have to have a good sense of scale, and of course I still need to put text here. But I can really do a lot of those things pretty fast. Of course, we always use capital letters in architecture. That is a gigantic up. But yeah, we're starting to get somewhere, at least in terms of a floor plan. Now, maybe my stairs continue or things like that, but I don't want to necessarily draw all of that over again. So I'm going to mirror it, in my case. I got to find the midpoint and make sure that I align it and hold shift. Wow, that was way quicker than doing that by hand. Don't get me wrong, this can save us a lot of time and speed. What I really like about it though is it has the ability to change a little bit. Right? I don't necessarily have to erase and make things look ugly, or I can sort of keep that accuracy, if you will. However, looks like my up arrow is going the wrong way, so let's go ahead and switch that around. Of course, I can mirror it again, and I do actually have a couple of options in the mirror. You could make it actually a copy of itself, or just choose to, you know, mirror that object and it won't copy itself. Another thing is you could just delete the previous piece, but yeah, again, I find both kind of helpful. I can use a polyline to make a break. I could really wing it if I wanted to, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I could still kind of freehand it. And sometimes I do, you know, to give it that human air that it normally would have. And it doesn't look too bad. But now we got a break. We got some floor plan things. Let's put some walls in this so we can model some things. Again, this is kind of a fictitious situation, but let's go ahead and make a polyline. I don't know, maybe I have this like cool interior wall that's 12 inches, so I'm gonna type in 12. I'm gonna hold shift. I don't know, I'm gonna get fancy with the spices because mine is kind of a fictitious project, so why not? 24 inches out. Maybe the wall comes out over here. We'll go with 48 inches, enter. Yeah, that's a pretty interesting wall. Of course, I'm not going to draw that whole line again. I'm just going to offset it and make it 12 inches. So now that I have this 12-inch wall, not too shabby. I do need to add some poché though. And you guys may have noticed if you don't have a closed line, that hatching or poché doesn't work out so well, right? It does need to be a closed situation. Don't get me wrong, sometimes I have to use near, and as you can see, it just kind of connects to anything. It says, yeah, well, that's near it, right? So be very careful about using near. I usually turn it right off as soon as I need to use it, but it can be useful. Let's say I need one there, and let's mirror that one. Again, sorry, this isn't much of a design as it is really just more for the sake of tutorial. But yeah, maybe I don't want this exterior wall here, so I'm going to take that piece. I'm going to hold shift and get that piece as well. That way when I hit trim, enter, I can just one fell swoop get rid of something, right? Uh-oh, some of my stairs need the rest of those, so I'll just draw a line. Not really a big deal. Again, it is completely two-dimensional, so still in that second dimension. Let's go ahead and hatch it, and let's get rid of those, kind of in the way. Of course, I'd want to continue to be organized, so don't get me wrong, now I've got a walls layer. I've got a couple of things I should probably add, such as walls. Uh-oh. Maybe I already have a walls layer. Or maybe not. Walls 2, just in case. I like to make my walls blue for some reason. I don't know, maybe just a habit. So in my case, I'm going to make sure that I select the things that I want to be walls, such as those pieces. I can hold shift and add to my selection, just like really any other program. Right click on the layer and change object layer. Of course, it's going to nicely turn blue to us, and it's going to help us, of course, in Illustrator when we put those together. Oh, there's a good situation to use close curve. Oh no, and as you can see, it doesn't always work. There was 2 openings, so honestly the computer was probably right. It was kind of like, is this what you mean, right? Unfortunately, computers just aren't actually smart yet, as much as we think they are. But I'll take those pieces. Another thing that I can do is type in join, and of course it'll join those pieces. And now I could definitely use close curve because there's only one situation. So close curve, and of course it'll close that for us. Pretty sweet. Next thing, I could probably get the rails and things like that. So definitely floor plans, pretty easy, right? I'd say, right? The next thing I could do is of course make sections, and really relatively about the exact same thing. I would just start drawing that with basically my 2D commands. And it's still at 1:1. Sweet. On 11 by 17. I could probably fit 2 floors on here. Could. However, for the sake of the assignment, I think it's okay if you just let them have a lot of airspace. Give them some white space. Maybe it gets a title block, obviously a label, things like that. So obviously, please don't stop here and just go, well, that's how far he went in the tutorial. Obviously, complete the drawing, right? However, from here, hey, that's my page. From here, we can actually start modeling something, however, or at least a lot easier. Now, don't get me wrong, I can get the whole thing, and of course, focus on that a little bit better. But when it comes to making any of the model, yeah. I would do those in Illustrator. Yeah. Even though, don't get me wrong, you could do that in the layer itself. So like if you go to any of these layers, you can choose the line type. And instead of continuous, you can change it to dash, dot, this, that, whatever. However, the only thing there, Katia, is if you change the scale of the drawing, it doesn't change the scale of the line. So you have to kind of sit there and like, mess with it all the time. And unfortunately, when you take it into Illustrator, it goes into all these little separate pieces, so I can't even change it. Now, that's why I recommend that you do all line weight and all color and any of the actual graphic stuff that we normally do in Illustrator, just because it handles it a little bit better. However, don't get me wrong, there are other professors that don't even touch Illustrator. They use Rhino to its fullest, but that's just not the way I want to teach it. I'd rather you get familiar with 5 different programs than just one and have it as a crutch. If you know 5 programs, you're going to be a lot better off. You're going to know which ones actually do things arguably the best. Anyway, it's a great question. But yeah, you could definitely change the line type of each layer. Just keep in mind that the scale has to be changed per the size of the drawing. Since you're at 1:1, that's probably not a huge problem. And if you're honestly consistent, again, it probably wouldn't be a huge problem, but it's kind of hard to teach that universally. Again, I just think Illustrator, there's a lot more options and leeway. Anyway, so let's say I've got my floor plan, I'm ready to go. It's definitely my opinion that you should always just make a copy, because 9 times out of 10 you accidentally move something, or something gets in the way, or yada yada yada, and you accidentally ruin the original and end up having to draw the original again. And you could save yourself so much time, since we have the amazing ability to just copy it. So when in doubt, before you're doing a huge operation, copy it. Another thing to do is also save. So Command S, and weirdly enough on the Mac it automatically saves. It's kind of annoying. You don't have to save on the Mac. For some reason it saves automatically. However, in Windows, yes, I would save every 15 to 30 minutes. And there's actually ways you can set that up as well. Anyway, let's start making some pieces, right? Maybe I want to model these stairs, and I want to be on the A team, and I want to start modeling these things, right? So one of the first things that I could do is, well, focus on one piece at a time. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of different options to model stairs. You could you could do many different methods. I'll try and do 2 of them. Maybe like an open stair and like more of a monolithic stair. Just cause, right? Let's get some walls first. So maybe I get this piece. I'm going to type in extrude, right? Or extrude curve. Should give us a bunch of options if I spell it correctly. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and extrude curve, and I want to make it a solid wall so that it's closed. And I can even control how high it is. So let's say, I don't know, 12 feet, enter. Sweet. Got a pretty sweet wall going on. It seems unfocused on it, so I'm gonna go ahead and click on it and do zoom extents. And now when I rotate, of course, it's now focused on that piece. If you find it a little hard to look at, another option is we can right click on the viewport, and we can change it to, say, ghosted, or X-ray is another popular one, just because it kind of looks like wireframe, but you can also tell when something's solid, so that's usually kind of nice. Bohuslav definitely prefers ghosted. Let's get that exterior wall. Why not? Let's go ahead and extrude it, and I don't know, maybe it goes all the way up, so maybe it's at 40 feet. Sweet. That's a big wall, and in some cases probably not what we have in our projects, right? So if I wanted to further change it, I could use that gumball, and of course change it up a little bit. Oh, I didn't get all of it though. Apparently it's not connected. Let's go ahead and join it. Unable to join surfaces or poly surfaces. And I think I know why. Because if the curve that it came from isn't closed, then it's not going to be closed either. And would you look at that, we forgot some pieces. Which is why you should always join your walls. Or the letter J, enter, is short for join. But as you can see, now it's a closed curve, so that when I do extrude something, it actually comes about. We'll go with 6 feet and we'll put it in the air. I guess 6 inches is cool too. But yeah, obviously we can use this to start actually using the geometry that we just drew in the floor plan to actually model or make the object. Now don't get me wrong, if this sounds like too much or too much even for your computer, again, you can just draw it by hand, or sorry, by digital in 2D. Don't have to go into the 3-dimensional. However, you know, if you're already familiar with SketchUp, honestly, it's a little different, but it should be a breeze. Let's make some stairs, and let's make it 2 different ways, right? I guess one of the things that we could start to calculate is, well, how far is this going to go up into the elevation, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So that's what? 19, 6 inches. About 9.5, right? What is that? 3.5. 3.5. What? 8.5. Gotcha. Yeah, so 8.5. Good to know, and I guess you don't really need it, at least the way that I like to do it. Usually I'll just draw the elevational. So in my case, I'm going to use all 4 viewports and kind of find where I'm at, right? You can sort of start to see where you are in all 4 viewports.
There's also like elevation.
Yeah, so I can use my right elevation, I can go to my front elevation, and actually I could do it in the mid command as well. So like if I go to set view, I could take a look at the left, right, and get those dimensions. What's nice about that is I can type in 6 inches, right, and get that quality that I need, and 12 inches for the tread, and really kind of click anywhere. Now, since I like to work a little smarter, not harder, I know that, well, all my stairs are going to be the exact same. So I'm going to use that previous point and make sure that I lock on to this point. As you can see, it can get kind of tricky. Another thing I can do is, well, connect those 3. So join, copy, and take that piece. It can be a little tricky because you can accidentally click on something else, right? Or accidentally align to something else. Just be a little careful. Like one of the students was saying earlier, it can be kind of relaxing to just kind of go through these step-by-step process, getting it just right and nailing it in. Not too bad. I think we have more steps than we need, but that's okay. Yeah, it looks like we do. Just one more than we actually need. Sweet. So, don't get me wrong, we have one piece, and if we extrude that, it's going to be like the world's thinnest material. We don't want paper thin stairs, right? We want those stairs to either have thickness, or maybe that's just actually kind of the structure that I need to maybe hold up floating stairs or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and make a copy just in case. So let's make one stair first. Go ahead and make a copy and kind of save it for later. Gonna of course hold shift. Oh, it looks like I copied something way out there. That's okay. When in doubt, try again. As you can see, I get a lot of in there, right? So it would be not a bad idea to be organized. If obviously that was on my stair layer, I'd just turn off every other layer and work on my stairs. So again, the price I pay for not being organized while I go. But that's okay, I can always find a view and get it just right too. Went ahead and joined it, and of course copied it. Push it off to the side. It won't let me do it in this view, but that's okay. You can open up all views at the same time and make a copy. There it is. So I want to make it 2 different ways just because I said I was going to show you 2 different ways. First one, obviously we need the other piece. So in my case, maybe it's just a regular stringer. Let's say it goes down 18 inches. And there's a reason why this is a little bit more advanced. We do have to think in sometimes 3 different places. Alright, got that piece. I do want to make sure that it stays the same angle, so I'm going to go ahead and draw that exact angle. I don't need to exactly know what it is, right? Because I can just draw it. Make it a little easier for you guys to see. And just make a copy. Oh, got a copy off in the middle of nowhere. Guess we don't really need that piece anymore. And it's starting to look like the profile, if you will, of that stringer. Now, well, if this is the bottom, I obviously don't want the stringer to go into the ground. So I'm going to draw a line that goes straight. And just let them intertwine so I can trim them. Simple enough. Now I'll take all of those lines and join them together. Oh, forgot one. I'll hold shift, join. Sweet. I'll go ahead and extrude. And in my case, I really only need 3 feet just because that's what I set my thickness to. And voila, I've got some stairs. Now in the shaded or modes, it kind of looks a little silly, right? You can start to see the back lines and things like that. I don't really recommend ever working in a rendered view, just in case that's a really great way to make your computer crash, especially while you're screen recording. So I'm not going to try and do that today. But shaded looks pretty good too, because it starts to get a good feel for what it looks like, right? But yeah, I didn't have to sit there and make every little stair at a time, right? I really modeled just the elevation and extruded it. Arguably, I could have just drawn all my elevations, all my sections, and all my floor plans, and I wouldn't have to trace shit, right? I would just simply use what I already drew and extrude it, right? Not a big deal. The second way, if you don't want really ugly monolithic stairs, is maybe we want some sort of floating stair situation, right? So in my case, well, I'm going to use that exact same curve because, well, why would I do it again? And I'm going to only make it 6 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and extrude it. And let's go with 6 inches so that it can actually hold up some other parts of my stair. Don't really need this, really kind of for just the sake of tutorial. But maybe I actually want these little rectangles. So I'm going to go ahead and hit rectangle. And I'm going to redraw that because, well, I want a perfectly closed one, and I already used some of, I already chopped up kind of the rectangles with my my rails, so that would be kind of silly. Extrude. Let's go with about 1.5 inches thick. It's looking like a pretty sweet stair. Now don't get me wrong, I could do even some more detail to this, and I would do it to that one stair, especially if I'm going to copy it over and over again. Let's go with chamfer edge, right? Because that one's hardly ever used. So I'm going to go with chamfer edge. I'm going to go with 0.25 of an inch, right? So really small. And then I'm basically just going to select the edges, and it's going to give it just that little bit of detail, right? And hit enter, and again, it just kind of it looks nice. It looks a little bit more realistic, like it's a chamfered edge. What's nice is I just take that piece. I'm going to go ahead and copy it, just in case I mess up. And I want to find the midpoint, just because I want to line it up with some of the other midpoint stuff that I have. I guess I can get it over there first, but I do want to pick a familiar edge. That way I always know what I'm doing with the object. So in my case, right, I'm lining up some things first, and as you can see, not so well. There's a better one. So as you can see, sometimes it'll lock onto a different point that you didn't want it to, right? So be careful. In my case, I know that it's 36 inches long, so if I move it 18 inches, it'll be on center, right? Let's test that theory. So I'll type in move. I know, so intuitive. Right, I'll type in 18 inches. I'll hold shift, and as you can see, it did get to the center point, but the center point of that, so since that's 6 inches, again, I'll have to do a little bit of math. Type in move, and since half of that would also be 3 inches, we can go ahead and make it on center. Now, the reason I did that and was so specific about it is because, well, I know that I'm going to copy it over and over again, so I want to make sure that I get it right. So I'll get that piece, and get that piece, and get that piece, and so on and so forth. But I'm essentially using the same point or some sort of regulating point so that I can model my stair. Now, yes, I could just do the same thing, but somehow it's just a little bit more therapeutic, and I get to show you when it messes up, right? When I accidentally select a point that's not really there, you'll see that it throws it off in the middle of space. It can definitely take a lot of practice. It also helps if you're not screen recording. But as you can see, definitely a lot different modeled stair. And maybe more of an acceptable option of what you want to do, right? We might need handrails, right? Another thing to talk about is, well, I wouldn't do all that over again. I'd simply, remove some of the stuff that I don't need. And after all, I do have an entire copy, so I don't have to worry too badly. I can't mess up. I have my floor plan over here. But yeah, I could take the exact same thing. I could group it. That way, I don't have to actually select all those over and over again. I could just select anywhere, and it's going to select the whole piece for me. And when I hit copy, it'll copy every single one of those pieces. Obviously, it's facing the wrong direction, so I can use gumball, hold it 90 degrees, and I can move it to the exact spot that it needs to be. So in my case, I'll take that end. Just like Leo was saying, it's going to be 8.5 feet in the air. So then I can move it 8.5 feet in the air. Click anywhere, 8.5 feet, hold shift, and voila. All right, now we're starting to get somewhere. This wall's just kind of distracting, so I'll get rid of it. A couple of other things we can do. Obviously, for a landing, I would just take that rectangle and, again, take those pieces. What if I want handrails? That's got to be hard. Well, not really. In fact, all we really need is the angle. So in my case, I'm going to take that point and that point. Again, this is why I like the computer. I can zoom in, I can take as long as I want. I know that handrails are 36 inches from the stair, so I just need to move it, say 36 inches, up in the Y direction, sweet. And as you can see, it's more like a wireframe right now, right? Oh, maybe if I wanted to add to that, I could still, right? So I could draw a line, take that in, draw it out a little bit, and then of course connect those. Type in join. Sweet, it's joined. So I have a couple of options here. I can pipe it, so P-I-P-E, and I could tell it a certain dimension, say, I don't know, 1 inch in radius, half inch in radius. And I want it to end as a half inch in radius. And I'll hit enter again, and it'll simply make a handrail. Now, don't get me wrong, we need all the other parts, but as you can tell, I could probably just make one of these. And maybe before I start piping this out, because I do want that curve, because it's going to make it a lot easier to model, if I can just select that point, sweep, and of course connect it to another point. Now, I could do that to each and every single one, or I could pipe it first. Another option is, well, I can add a really fancy profile too. So we can get fancy with the spices and go Louis Kahn on it. This is normally something I would go with in my computer graphics class. However, don't want to rob you guys of that. Let's say we got a fancy handrail going. Got a fancy shape. I don't know, obviously I'm just making it up. Maybe it's got a little hook in there for our hand or something. And it's fancy, definitely fancy. We'll take that piece, obviously rotate it in a direction that makes more sense to the profile. So in my case, I'll need to rotate it in gumball and move it up closer to the rail itself. And you may have done this actually in computer graphics before, but it's called a sweep. Right, so I want to align my, and let's focus in on this a little bit more. Sweep. Right, we want it to actually align with that pole. So in my case, I like to usually put this pole through that profile, is what it's called. And I'll type in sweep. Now there's two options. In my case, I just need sweep 1. It's going to ask me for the rail. So quite literally going to use the rail. Then it's going to ask me for the selected sweep shapes. I'm going to hit that, press enter. It's going to say which direction you want to go. Doesn't really matter. You can click, it'll go in opposite direction. And in my case, I do want to close the sweep. Hopefully it'll close. Maybe it won't. Maybe it will. It's alright. We can always cap it too. But as you can see, we can get really fancy with the modeling, right? A lot more than arguably, say, any other program that quickly. Now, yeah, it does mess up and things like that, but as you can see, we can get detailed pretty quickly with our drawings. Arguably, I can go the other way around too. So I did want to throw this in here just in case you're unfamiliar. Well, what if I want to take this piece, right, and I want to make lines from it? Well, I'll just type in make 2D, press enter, enter again. I'll go to my top view because that's where it's always produced. And as you can see, it made the flat 2D lines for me. And just to kind of prove that, let's go over it dimensionally, and it's flat. So again, that would be something I could easily take into Illustrator and change the line weights and what have you. I could do all of it, right? Now don't get me wrong, this is eventually what I'll go over for that 2-point perspective in the modeling, right? We're about 1:15 in, let's continue, right? So a bit of modeling, we covered it, sweet. Now, how would I go about drawing a 2-point perspective digitally? Same as your analog, right? Shouldn't be too difficult there. Now, just like the analog, it's going to require some things. I'm going to need my elevation, and I'll need my floor plan, and I'll have to set it up just like I would on my desk, right? I even like to make the desk, right, and just call this the 11x17 piece of paper and almost act like it's a real thing. And in fact, sometimes I'll even group it just so I don't mess up those lines. And in my case, I would need another drawing, the section or the elevation, so that I can get some of those lines and produce them. Now, just like a regular drawing, I'm going to have my horizon line, I'm going to have a power, perspective plane line, and I can even start to rotate, in my case, the drawing, so that I could start producing my 2-point perspective. Now, as you can imagine, this should be a lot easier compared to the analog, or at least a lot more accurate. In fact, just because of OSNAP alone, you can start to calculate this a lot easier. Now don't get me wrong, it's still tedious, which is why, if you notice, part 3 isn't actually due, even though we'll talk about it briefly here and there, and we'll continue obviously the tutorials. This isn't the only tutorial for this part, so do stay tuned. But yeah, part 3 is not due until quite some time, until week 8. So there's plenty of time here, right? Either to model or to just simply calculate this as a normal 2-dimensional drawing. So either option is fine for this project. Like I said, if you've taken computer graphics, try and model it. If you haven't, please do not try, all right? Don't give yourself so much more work and try to learn something at the same time when it might not benefit you right now. In fact, did Professor Rhino talk about this at all? About what he accepts in terms of digital versus analog? Usually he's pretty stringent about it. You might want to ask him, is it okay if I draw this digitally? Because some professors, they still want analog. And at least to the best of my recollection, Nick Rhino is also one of those professors who appreciates much more analog drawings in graphics too, or sorry, in his D2 classes. So definitely something to maybe ask him about. However, for our assignment, yes, we are heavily into the digital. So whether you want to actually trace this, right, from actually a previous drawing, say your elevations, your sections, or your floor plans, or you simply just want to redraw it again, right? Maybe actually fix some things that were maybe actually off in the first one. In some cases, I can think of yours, Brandon, might be a lot easier to create and draw because of its complexity of that it was. Whereas some of you guys might realize, oh man, I can make this a little bit more complex than I was actually doing in analog. I just kind of went with a spiral, but now I'm kind of seeing it different and I can actually do something with my stairs. So I do want to point out, guys, that you can still change your design. Still, right? Now don't just radically go to something else and it's just completely different. I mean, it should be somewhat inspired. I mean, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as Professor Bosov would say. But it could absolutely still change. If you wanted to start adding ramps or different stairs, or you just actually realize yours doesn't work and that you do need to change it. Or maybe those exterior walls, we open them up a little bit or what have you, right? What I'm trying to say is, of course, that it can still change. Now, what's nice about this, however, is we can find a stationary point. So I'm going to type in point and literally make a point. And that's where it is. That's the point. What's nice about this is, well, I can set it up to constantly find that point. So I can select point. And as you can see, this is going to become a much easier process in terms of finding the alignments or intersections. So for instance, let's say I want to get all these intersections. I could really go back and forth and really find intersections quite easily. I mean, down to the very minuscule. But this is something that you would want to see. These would be, of course, maybe a construction line layer and still incorporated into the drawing, right? To be completely honest, not a lot changes. It's really just the tool that changes, not the methodology or even the way, the standardizations of the typical things that we use, such as the line weight and what actually gets the heaviest versus what gets the lightest. But hopefully this is enough to get started, right? Whether you want to start on the 1 point first or the 2 point, or you want to start modeling it, one of the things that everybody universally must do is make those floor plans. So what I would say is, let's use the rest of the time to either start scanning our drawings, right? Or start drawing them in 2D, right? Because you'll either need it to start 2-dimensional drawing, or you'll need it to start 3-dimensional modeling, right? Just so that you can have a standard or a go-by in order to model those shapes. Does that make sense so far, guys? Like I said, I don't want to go too heavily into it. Obviously, this is more like a 4-part series in terms of tutorials. And we're going to continue on either, well, we're going to talk about exercise 5 on Tuesday. So I'd imagine I'm going to go over printing on Monday. Right? You may have noticed I haven't even gone over printing. Right? Don't get me wrong, I think a lot of us could probably get started, and you might already even be familiar with printing because of Studio. right? So I would say have a keen eye out. If you notice somebody struggling, help them out. Show them how to print, especially if you can share that knowledge with them. We're only as strong as our weakest link in studio, right? The studio is only as good as the guy who doesn't get it, right? So help that guy out or gal, right? Any questions so far, guys? 2D, 3D? There's some really great questions so far by Kathia, Leo. No other questions, guys? Which way are you going to choose? 2D or 3D? 3D. Oh, right. Who's going to go else 3D modeling? Raise them high. All right. Who's going to stick to 2D? Maybe undecided? I mean, no matter what, you got to try the 2D again, too. That's why we do exercise 5, right? It's so that we can get more familiar with that. However, just to recap, exercise 5 isn't due till Tuesday at the beginning of class, because I do want to pin them up just like we see it here in the hallway and discuss them, talk about them. But obviously continue in this tutorial just because there's plenty of things to go over. But really your task is pretty simple. We're doing the exact same project, now just with a different tool. Right? You still have the ability to change it, right? So there's that too. Anyway, I'll go ahead and leave it at that if there are no other questions. None? Yeah. What do you got? I can barely hear you. Okay. There you go. I'll leave it at that then.